What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video, toughest draft decisions, and I'm very excited to make this one. So about a week ago, I asked you guys to submit questions on the website, and I asked for it to be more strategy-based questions we could talk about, not just like who would you rank higher between these two players, and you guys crushed it. I mean, every single question I've looked at so far has been fantastic. So we have plenty of things to go over today, and there are a ton of extra questions that I haven't even had the chance to look at yet. So depending on how much you guys like this video, I can do this more often on YouTube. But remember that we're going to be doing this at least once a week moving forward on the podcast. So make sure you're following us on iTunes and Spotify, because it looks like we'll be answering basically every single question that's submitted, because you guys did just such a great job with these questions. And definitely keep submitting them. So you can go to the website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, and then just click the Contact Us tab. There's a Contact Us drop down from there. And then just click Fantasy Questions when asked for reason for contact. And then type in whatever your question is, and we'll be sure to answer that either on YouTube or on the podcast. So I'll go over these questions in a minute, but first, of course, we need to start things off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which running back had the highest drop rate last season. The answer was Sony Michel, Heat Stars 11. Got that one right first. Today's stat: which wide receiver had the highest single week performance in fantasy last season? All right, let's dig into some of these questions. So the first one up is a keeper question, and it's probably the easiest one on here. 12-team league, and they keep one player each year. He's asking Lamar Jackson or Alvin Kamara, and he picks third. I don't really see a case for keeping Lamar over Kamara unless there's a penalty. So in a league that I'm in, there's a penalty for wherever you drafted them. So you likely drafted Kamara in the first round. In our league, you'd have to give up your first round pick to keep him. Whereas if you drafted Lamar in the 12th round, you'd have to give up your 12th round pick. So in that scenario, you're obviously keeping Lamar Jackson. But if there's the same penalty for keeping both players, you're keeping Alvin Kamara because he's just more valuable. Next question is for smaller leagues. So he plays in an 8-team league, and the keeper is your first round pick. So in this one, no matter who you keep, your first round pick. So he's going to be keeping Michael Thomas. And his question is for rounds 2 and 3. He thinks he might be able to get Drake or Sanders in the second round, but he could also attack quarterback and tight end, essentially locking in a top 3 producer at wide receiver because he has Michael Thomas, and then quarterback and tight end, he can probably grab top 3 options in the second and third round. And starting off, maybe something like Michael Thomas, Lamar Jackson, and Kittle. So should he do that, or should he stick with running backs early, taking Michael Thomas in the first and then 2 running backs in the second and the third rounds? This is a great question, and it's something you need to consider in smaller leagues, because if this is 10 or 12 teams, we're going 100% running back there. You've already locked in Michael Thomas. You're grabbing at least 3 running backs in your next 4 picks, and you're just hammering out that position. But you need to gain edges in smaller leagues because everyone has an elite team. People like to trash on smaller leagues like, oh, it's so easy. No, it's not. It's not easy. It's easy to build a good team. Everyone's going to have a good team. But it's not easy to win because everyone has a good team. So you need to be smart. You need to think about areas where you can gain an edge. I don't think you need to gain an edge taking Lamar in the second round because you're basically guaranteed one of Lamar, Mahomes, Dak, Kyler, Wilson, Watson, and Allen. That top 7 is pretty clearly ahead of everyone else. So I would just make sure you get one of them. And I just don't think you need to spend a top 10 pick getting Lamar. So I'd make sure that you go with running back in that second pick. And then I think tight end in the third would be smart. So if one of those elite players is still there in what would be the late third round, then I would target them. So you're starting off something like maybe Michael Thomas, Drake or Sanders, and then Kittle. I think that would be a really good start, and just make sure you grab one of those top 7 quarterbacks, because you really don't want to be waiting until the end if guys take backups and be starting like, I don't know, you don't want to be starting Rivers when everyone else you're playing has Mahomes and they have Lamar and they have Kyler, right? Now you're at a disadvantage against everyone. So make sure you get one of those top 7. Next question basically boils down to what do we do with the 5th pick? It's a very difficult decision this season. He's basically saying he's in a full PPR 12-team league, and he knows the people he drafts with are going to take McCaffrey, Barkley, Zeke, and Kamara, right? So what does he do at 5, especially with Cook potentially holding out? Like I said, difficult decision. If Cook does not hold out, we're obviously taking him at 5. But if we don't get any sort of news that indicates one way or the other by the time you're drafting, I do think that is a little bit too risky. And I would go, since it's a full PPR league, with Michael Thomas. He asked about maybe going Derrick Henry. I don't think that's a great idea in full PPR. He's just not going to get the targets, and he is facing some touchdown regression. You could go Mixon or Drake, but at that point, you're kind of taking players that are similar to what you're going to get in that 2nd round. I don't think there's a huge drop-off. There is one, but grabbing Michael Thomas is not going to be the reason that you lose in a full PPR league. In half PPR, it's a much better discussion taking these running backs, but in full PPR, you're locking in a guy that's going to have like 125 receptions, going to have the yards, going to have a good amount of touchdowns. I just think that's your best bet, and then hope that one of these really nice running backs falls to you in the 2nd round. But I definitely make sure that with your next 2 picks, you're taking running back with stable workload and preferably a lot of receiving upside. So I like the workload on Clyde. If you don't agree with my take that Clyde is going to get the workload, is going to get the receptions, don't go with him. If you agree with me, you think he's going to get that work, then Clyde would be a nice option in the 2nd round. But guys like Gurley, guys like Melvin Gordon, players we know are going to be involved, we know we're going to have touchdowns, we know we're going to get receptions, that's who I'd want to take. I wouldn't want to be taking guys that are a little bit more risky, because then you decrease your chance of hitting on some of these early running backs. And having already taken Michael Thomas, now you're just potentially opening up a scenario where you don't have running backs and you lose. So I'd want to be targeting a good amount of running backs in the next 2 to 3 rounds. Honestly, probably 3 running backs in the next 3 rounds. And I'd want guys that you just know have produced in the past and are likely to produce this season. Next up is, can we get some auction advice? Don't think I've made an auction video this season. Planning on doing an auction mock draft, but not too many auction specific videos. I do have targets up on the site. So for people who got the draft package or all in, just draft those players. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. And my biggest tips are, 1, don't be afraid to spend up at running back. One huge mistake people make is they do the mock drafts or whatever, and they see the average price of players, but everyone knows when you get into an auction draft, the prices skyrocket, right? McCaffrey doesn't go for like $60. He starts going for $70, $80, and you're like, whoa, can't pay that. You can't think that, oh, I'm just going to wait. All these dudes are spending money. They're all going to run out of money, because then you're going to have like $15 for each of your bench spots, and you're going to end up dropping like $10 on Zach Moss when you could have had him for $4. By spending up early at running backs, you're doing a few things. 1, you're locking in, some of the most valuable players in drafts. That's always a good thing. But you're also gaining information. You know exactly how much you can spend on your other positions, because you can then start budgeting it out, right? And if you keep passing on players, then your options start to dwindle. There's now less elite players to get on your team, and you know less about what your team is going to look like. And it's a greater chance that you're going to fall into the trap of making this like mid-round team. I've seen a lot of players, they're like, look at how incredible this team is. I grabbed everyone in rounds 4 through 6. That's not good, because you have no idea who you're going to start every week. I mean, you have like 6 wide receivers that are all the exact same player, so you have no idea who to start. And then your upside is capped, because the first 4 rounds have significantly higher success rates, and they have players who have far more upside, players who have top 5 potential. Once you get past the 4th round, that really starts to go down. So even in an auction league, you got to be loading up on these early round players, and do not be afraid to spend up with these high priced running backs, because you're going to be able to find savings at all these other positions late. People are going to go for way cheaper than you think. So you're fine taking like 2 or 3 high priced running backs. That's my biggest tip. Next question deals with the targets on the rankings. And they asked, for the same position player, how many spots would you move down in the rankings to draft a target player over a higher ranked player that's not a target? This is another fantastic question. I know a good amount of people have asked the same thing. So when you look at our rankings, you're going to see some players listed as targets, some as avoids, and others with no tag, which is basically just neutral. Like, we're not aggressively targeting them, we're not avoiding them, they're just players, right? You can take them, not take them, I don't really care. Ideally, you want to draft as many targets as possible, because those are my favorite picks. But the rankings are still the rankings. So I have Cooper Kupp as the wide receiver 18, 2 spots below ECR, 6 spots below ADP. It likely means you won't get him in any leagues, but he doesn't have an avoid tag, so I'm fine. If he is the highest wide receiver on the list and you want to take a wide receiver there, take Cooper Kupp. I have McLaurin as the wide receiver 21. That's 3 above ECR, 8 above ADP, and he's listed as a target because I love him this season. But if I wanted you to draft McLaurin over Kupp, then I would rank him over Kupp, right? So I wouldn't be reaching multiple players back to grab a target, because those players are listed as targets because they're exceptional values where you can get them. But if you start taking them earlier than they go, then that takes away a lot of their value, or at least some degree of their value. So if you want to go like 1 or 2 spots back, then that's fine, but only do that if it's to get a player you really like. So if you're like, ooh, he's listed as a target, I really want him on my team, he's not going to be there in the next round, take him. I'm totally fine with that. You guys can vary the rankings a little bit. But if you don't have a take, you're like, well, he has a target on this player, I don't really know that there's a difference, but he has a target, no, just take the guy that I have ranked higher. This is how I would use the tags. Let's say you're in the 5th round and your options at running back are something like Mostert, Ingram, Singletary, Swift. And your options at wide receiver are like Lockett, Woods, Keenan Allen, and DK Metcalf. That's a decision a lot of you are going to need to make. It's a round that you're probably still taking running back or wide receiver, and that's basically who's going in the 5th round. This is where the targets come in handy. If you look at the tags we have listed, you're not going to see any of those running backs listed as targets. But you are going to see Woods, Lockett, and Metcalf all as targets and ranked in that order, at least as of right now. So ideally, you take Woods with that pick. It's not as much that you're looking at these targets at one specific position, because I would just take them in the order that it's ranked. But it's when looking across positions. If you see a dead zone that have no targets at quarterback or tight end, don't be taking quarterback or tight end. It means you should be looking at running backs and wide receivers at that portion of the draft. So I hope that answers some of your questions, because I know a lot of people have asked the exact same thing. Next up is similar to like an RB0 strategy. If for any reason, whether it's value or you just like doing it, you go wide receiver heavy in the early rounds, would it be better to take a more experienced running back like Breida, or would it be better to take someone younger, someone like a rookie that maybe has some upside? So I answered this question a little bit in this week's 0 RB video, but think about it this way. You go wide receiver heavy, it means that you're probably set at wide receiver, right? I mean, you probably hit on a few elite guys. You're not going to be looking at that position for free agency or in trades. You're good. So your goal for the rest of the draft is to hit on one elite running back. You know, if you could leave that draft with one running back that turns into an RB1, you're more than happy with your draft. Because then all you need to do is find one on free agency or trade for one player, and you have dominant skill players. You're only trying to hit on running backs with upside. So preferably you're only taking running backs that have ceilings. So guys like Jonathan Taylor, Montgomery, Swift, Akers, Geis, Dobbins. And then once those guys are gone, backups. Madison, Moss, Pollard, Duke, Boston Scott, Chase Edmonds. All of these players I just listed have paths to being league winners if things go right for them. So I guess to answer your question in short, you want to lean on youth, and especially youth on high scoring offenses, even if you're taking the backup, because those are the players who could break out. And like I said, you're only looking to hit on one running back if you go wide receiver heavy, because you have free agency and you have a trade market to fill in that second piece. And once you do that, your team's going to be really good. So youth on great offenses, just looking for upside. Next up is a quarterback question. What round does it make sense to take a quarterback in the Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, and Russell Wilson tier? In a 12-team league, I think the 5th round is a really nice spot, but I'd really only list Dak and Murray in that tier. I think it's basically 3 groupings for this top 7 I talk about. You've got like your Lamar, Mahomes kind of next to each other, then Dak and Kyler, and then the trio of Wilson, Watson, and Allen. For Lamar and Mahomes, I'd be willing to take one of them in like the late 3rd, which is pretty unlikely that ends up happening, and it means I probably won't get any of them. But if someone dropped late 3rd, early 4th, that's when I'd be looking at those guys. Then with Dak and Kyler, we're looking at the 5th round. And for the tier of like Wilson, Watson, and Allen, then I'd be looking more at the 6th round. But my main focus on all of these quarterbacks would be Dak, Murray, and Allen. Those would be the guys I'd be targeting, and I'd really only be waiting for a deal. And our last question kind of deals with quarterback again. So he's in a standard scoring league, and he's curious why the quarterbacks are ranked a little bit higher than they are in half and full PPR. Said he usually waits on quarterback, but he's willing to take Kyler or Dak in the 5th round if they fall. And I think his strategy is perfect, right? Quarterback is approached super relaxed. Like you're just waiting. If there's an incredible value, take it. If there's not, just wait until the final rounds. If Dak or Kyler fall to you in the 5th, cool, take them. But if they don't, then it's no big problem. You just wait for one of the late round quarterbacks we love. To answer the question, quarterbacks are a little bit more valuable in standard scoring just because the skill players score fewer points. So having elite quarterbacks is more of an edge because, they score the same points and it's going to be a lower scoring environment overall. So you want those players who give you the edge at the highest scoring position. But also, only use the rankings for the first 3 rounds or so. And that's whether you use my rankings, you use ESPN rankings, you go to a different website. No matter where you go, only use rankings overall, so across positions, for the first 3 rounds. After that, you need to switch to positional rankings only. And that's why I really like our rankings because of the targets. Because you can switch to positional, but then some of you might be a little bit scared after that because you're like, well, I don't know which position to take. That's why we have the targets to help guide you through the draft. But if you're looking overall, it's not taking into context your team, right? Because I might have a quarterback listed as the top guy in the 5th round, but if you don't have a running back yet, you can't take a quarterback. You have to take a running back, and overall rankings don't take any of that into account. So in those first 3 rounds, go with overall rankings. That's totally fine. But after you exit the 3rd round into the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds, you gotta just be looking at positional rankings. So this question kind of becomes irrelevant. Just look at the targets and look at who is the next highest quarterback overall, and if you would prefer to just wait later. But to answer the question, it is just value of quarterbacks is a little bit higher in standard. So I think this was an extremely helpful video, and it was a lot of fun to make. So I know I said this would be exclusive to the podcast moving forward, but if this video does well, then maybe we can do it more on YouTube also, because there are just a ton of questions I did not have time to go over. So we have more than enough questions to continue making these videos, and I'm sure you guys are going to keep submitting your questions as well. But this is definitely going to happen once a week on the podcast. So if you submit a question, follow us on the podcast because we're very likely to answer it. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.